In 2021, a small indie game called Tory 3D was released, and it ended up getting quite a bit of traction online. I saw a tweet about this game, and it was less than £1 for me to buy, so as a big fan of 3D platformers, I figured I'd give it a try. And sure, it was getting a lot of Sonic comparisons, and Sonic isn't usually where my interest lies in terms of 3D platformers, but I thought why not? Ever since then, I've become a fan of Siactro, the developer of the Tory games. Siactro is the alias of Marcus Horn, an independent developer who at this point has developed a bunch of retro-inspired games, mostly platformers, usually having light horror aspects to them. Over the past 2.5 years, I've played many of these games, and anyone who's watched my top 100 video game list knows that some of them have become games I truly adore. At time of writing, Christmas has just passed by, and during that Christmas period, a new title, Tory Jolly Jam, was released. I wasn't passing up an opportunity to play a Tory themed Christmas game, and I eventually ended up deciding that I wanted to take the dive and play all the Siactro games I hadn't played before. It was great playing some awesome little gems I never knew about before, and I also revisited all the ones I had already played and gained a new appreciation for them. And now, in a thinly veiled attempt to find an excuse to gush about Horn's body of work, I've decided to try and rank every game made by Siactro. Now what counts here? I basically just took all the games that were on itch.io as the definitive list. I originally used Wikipedia as a source, but it didn't have Silver Trigger 64 or Tory Jolly Jumble on it, so itch.io it is. And yes, I'm going to be including things like Tory 3D Jumbled Jam, even though it acted as an update for Tory 3D, because it was also released as a standalone. If a game has another release within it as extra content, it will be a factor in my ranking of these games, but only the fact that you can play that release in the game, and not the actual quality of that portion. I'm also not going to be ranking the Patreon exclusive game Pengu Blast, because that would just feel kind of weird. Firstly because it's exclusive to Patreon, but also because it isn't necessarily in the state it would actually be publicly released in, so it would be unfair to rank it among the other games that have released in their finished state. But suffice it to say, I really like it. Also, during the making of this video, the Super Kiwi 64 soundtrack released, and it came with a bonus game called Lansbury's Sneak Out. This isn't on itch.io, but I am still counting it for this ranking. I want to mention before starting, this ranking is entirely personal to me. This isn't meant to be objectively judging them, as objectively judging games is impossible. So while my opinion on the quality of the actual game matters, my own biases will be a massive factor in a lot of areas. I should also mention that one thing that struck me about the games when playing them was that none of them were bad by any means. Even the games I didn't gel with as much had things I really liked, and this kind of feeds back into the reason I'm such a fan of this developer. Finally, I'm going to be discussing spoilers for some of the games, so beware. These games are not only very cheap, but they're also usually quite short, so I would recommend playing the games before delving into spoilers. I won't discuss spoilers of every game though, so I'll give an additional warning for any games that I go more in depth with, as these are the games I think should be experienced firsthand. I think that's just about everything, so let's get into it. Number 13, Hungry Ducks. Hungry Ducks is a very simple game. There are ducks, and the ducks are hungry. You have to feed them apples to keep them satiated, but if there aren't any apples in the feeding area or they can't get to the apples, you become dinner. There's not much to say here. It has a very simple concept and it works, but there isn't enough to keep me invested, especially considering I kinda sucked at it. I feel like this is sort of trying to lean into Siactro's usual horror elements, but it isn't particularly scary. Not bad, but not one I'm likely to return to. Number 12, Silver Trigger 64. Many of Siactro's games are based on Nintendo 64 or PS1 era platformers. There are a few exceptions though, and Silver Trigger 64 is one of these, seeming to be inspired much more by the iconic GoldenEye game for Nintendo 64 and other shooters of the era. It's an on-rails game which just asks you to shoot when you think you need to, which is usually when confronted with an enemy or when wanting to open a door to take an alternate path. The idea is to try to only shoot when you have to. Taking on the role of 0064, you're a spy, not a warrior, so limiting the amount of bullets you use is ideal. This concept seems kind of basic at first, and the game does try to give you chances to apply decision making. As I said, you can take alternate paths that might not use as many bullets, as well as there being opportunities where enemies don't see you and so don't need to be killed. The issue is that there isn't enough depth, and there isn't really any thought needed. Choosing alternate paths could be a good way of achieving this in theory, but as you can't see past the door before you've shot it open, it would essentially end up being trial and error. The thing is, if this game was longer, I could see it introducing a lot more interesting scenarios of choices that you have to make. Horn's games though are all very short, bite-sized experiences. I think of all the games he's released, this one suffers the most for that short length, as it doesn't allow a promising concept to be expanded to the point of actually being interesting. Number 11, Tasty Ramen. Siactro games almost always offer some element of horror, usually via creepy undertones or unsettling imagery, but Tasty Ramen is the most traditionally horror-based game. In it, you take the role of Ren, who has to go into the shop she works and try not to be killed by a demonic bowl of ramen that tries to pursue her. Now, the reason this game is so low is because this just isn't my type of game. I've played horror games before, but they aren't usually for me, especially the type of horror game where you're pursued by a creature. I haven't played much of this one, so maybe this is unfair to it, but my nerves just can't handle this kind of thing. Fortunately, the Siactro YouTube channel has a walkthrough of the game, so I was able to at least see the full thing. Even though I can't get into it myself, I do like a lot about it. The visuals are wonderful. Obviously it's working with the retro 3D graphics, but it has such a wonderful setting and I love the cherry blossom outside the shop. The presence of voice acting here is also quite nice, and I feel like it would have further increased my engagement of the game if I'd been able to stick with it. There's also this awesome anime style opening that was pretty fun. It should be noted that this is positioned as being episode 1 of Tasty Ramen, so you could view it as being an incomplete experience, but I don't actually think that is much to its detriment. So yeah, there's a lot to like here, it's just not for me. Number 10, Tory 3D Jumbled Jam. Tory may well be what Siactro is most well known for, and I imagine that is both as a result of and what has led to the fact that of the 12 games, 5 of them are Tory games. And sure, Jumbled Jam was released in the original Tory 3D as an update, but it was also released standalone, so I'm counting it. As it is, Jumbled Jam is great because the Tory gameplay is great. It's fun to play and there are certainly highlights in the game, some of which take concepts from the base game to a new level or put them in a new light. With all that said, this is my least favourite Tory release. And sure, the fact that there are only 4 levels contributes to that, but Tory Genesis has just 3 levels and that's higher up on this list. In reality, it's just that I feel like it leans a little too much on finicky and annoying utilisation of gameplay mechanics. This might be a get good moment, but a lot of these levels feel like they task you with having to land on very narrow platforms or having to avoid holes that are very difficult to see, and as much as that is supposed to push you to be more skillful, I found it somewhat irritating at times. But with that said, it's still Tory. Tory is overall a very fun series and that's what matters really. Even though I have some issues with this release, I would still recommend playing it. And I mean, in reality, I'm basically comparing a DLC update to other full games. It's not really a fair comparison. This game is best played as a part of Tory 3D, so that's pretty alright in my books. Number 9, Lansbury's Sneak Out. Lansbury's Sneak Out is a very small game that was released as a bonus for purchasing the Super Kiwi 64 soundtrack on Bandcamp. Firstly, I think the actual method of distribution here is genius and a lot of fun. We had no idea this game was existed until a few days before it was released, so it was an awesome little surprise. As for the actual game, well, Super Kiwi 64 conditioned me to always expect that the robot monsters would be very slow moving, so when one suddenly started stomping towards me at high speed, it gave me an absolute shock. I almost didn't want to play any further because my nerves can't deal with stealth, but I powered through. The crux of the game is that you're playing as Lansbury, the dog that is stuck on the island with Kiwi in Super Kiwi 64, and you have to sneak past the robots to escape in a top-down stealth game. It's pretty intense, and trying to figure out the cycles is really nerve-wracking, but I made it through. There are only 4 levels, but the first 2 are easy, and the last one really relies on you scouting ahead to figure out what cycle you need to move on. In a way, once you've figured out what cycle to go on, it's pretty easy, but it's still a bit unsettling. Still not my kind of thing, but I'm glad I played it, and the actual distribution is arguably the coolest thing about it anyway. More of this kind of stuff, please. Number 8, Kiwi 64. Kiwi 64 was Siactro's first platformer, and the Banjo-Kazooie inspiration is clear. It's a collectathon starring a brown animal mascot who wears a red backpack and interacts with inanimate objects with eyes. And you know what? It nails the Banjo vibes really well. It's very short, of course, being a single small level that shouldn't take more than 10 minutes to complete, but it has a few extra little bits that make it stand out to me. So from here, there will be spoilers for Kiwi 64. For those of you who've already played it, or who don't care about spoilers, while this is in part a loving recreation of games like Banjo-Kazooie, the parody in this title is hard to deny. The game tells you that there are 60 clefs to collect, and if you get them all, you'll be able to play the sequel, Kiwi 65. There are, in fact, only 59, and I'm glad I'm not the only person who went mad trying to find the last one. There's also the ability to go out of bounds, and once you're beyond the walls there are some pretty cool things to see, like this giant creepy shadow fox and a TARDIS. I found that using this aubergine in a block was a fairly consistent method to get across the border. It's not perfect though, not by any stretch of the imagination. I feel like compared to most other Siactro games, the controls here are very finicky and far less refined, and it's one of the shorter games too. I also feel like it doesn't necessarily feel unique to something like Banjo-Kazooie, at least not until you go out of bounds or realise you can't get all the clefs. And that isn't inherently bad, but it does mean that other games that make themselves more unique stand out a bit more. Overall, these aren't massive issues, and for what it is, Kiwi 64 is absolutely worth checking out, even just as a novelty, especially if you love collectathons and have 10 minutes to spare. Number 7, Tory Genesis. It's no secret that the Tory games took a lot of inspiration from Sonic the Hedgehog. Trying to speed through the levels quick is a great part of the games, and as more games in the series have been released, there have been more and more ways for you to build up your momentum, and it makes for some exhilarating gameplay, just like a Sonic game. Tory Genesis was released specifically to coincide with Sonic's 31st anniversary, as a way of paying homage to the series that inspired Tory. In essence, it's just 3 new levels in the Tory 2 engine, which have some Sonic theming to them. But more Tory levels is never a bad thing. I'm not a massive Sonic guy, but it was cool to see Tory placed in a Sonic-inspired environment. There's also something quite cool which I would need to go into spoiler territory to discuss, so again, if you want to remain unspoiled, then go play Tory Genesis and come back later, or skip ahead. Each of the levels has 3 crystals hidden throughout. I found a couple of them tricky to reach, but once I'd collected them, I found I was able to play the game as Super Tory, an obvious parody of Super Sonic. Tory becomes gold and very fast, also being able to kill enemies on contact. This was quite difficult to control, but it was a very neat power trip, being able to leap through levels faster than before. The final level especially was a lot of fun with this power up. Even though I wasn't able to appreciate this as much as a Sonic fan would, it was still a blast to play, as Tory games always are. Number 6, Beanie. I didn't have a lot of interest in Beanie for a long time. While 2D platformers are my favourite genre, I'm mostly into Siactro games for the 3D platformers, and I've also never really been into the original Donkey Kong Country games that end up being the partial inspiration for this one. But I wanted to try every game that Siactro has made, and I found that, yeah, Beanie is pretty good. It's kinda unique among platformers in that you go upwards instead of to the side, a take I think is quite cool. However, possibly as a result of this, level layouts were sometimes a little repetitive for me. After all, there's only so many ways to lay out a stage to let the players ascend. The individual levels each have their own gimmicks though, which makes it feel fresher for longer. I did also find that it was a bit easy though. As far as I can tell, other than some knockback, there's no consequence to being hit by enemies or obstacles, and you don't seem to be able to die. There are also bees that keep you afloat on the bottom of the screen if you fall down, which again means that it's a tad easy. However, what eventually hooked me about the game was trying to go for 100% completion by trying to complete every level within a certain time, typically between 45 and 59 seconds. Trying to optimise movement perfectly was a little tricky, and it was sometimes very tight, but hitting the beehive within the time was very satisfying every time. Overall, it's a good 2D platformer, and it really does nail the Donkey Kong Country look. There's also a pretty cool extra once you finish the game that I personally got a lot out of, as well as an awesome reward for getting the time trial medals in every level. So yeah, pretty good game with some neat moments in it, and it's a shame that it seems unlikely we'll see it expanded on because this one surprised me. Number 5, Macbat 64. Macbat 64 is without a doubt the most creative Siactro game. It once again seems to be very heavily based on Nintendo 64 era collectathon platformers, although I personally think it shares more in common with puzzle games which have you in an environment and you have to complete tasks and solve puzzles in the right order to get to the end, as opposed to just collecting a bunch of stuff throughout the level, although that does factor in. Don't take this as a bad thing, I love these kinds of games and I really enjoyed Macbat. However, what makes this game stand out to me is the creativity on offer. Every level has a different theme, as you'd expect, but these levels take their concepts beyond mere aesthetics, and it defines their gameplay too. I'm going to spoil some of these worlds, so here's your spoiler warning. One of the worlds, for example, has you trying to unlock doors in a haunted house setting. Another has you going through a Kirby-inspired 2D platforming level. Another level is called Tubular City, and it is exactly what you think it is, and it is excellent. And this is all before you get to the bonus levels, which are all incredibly interesting in their own right, or the fact that Kiwi 64 is hidden in the game for you to be able to play. My one problem with the game is that the camera controls could sometimes be very finicky, but that's a small thing. The game is a lot of fun, and the creativity on offer makes it worth every second. Number 4, Tory Jolly Jam. Horn has included a few Christmas themed offerings in his games. Tory 2, Beanie and Macbat 64 all had Christmas themed level, and I always find that to be a lot of fun. So Tory Jolly Jam, a Tory game primarily themed around Christmas, was right up my street. It's not a big game, in fact the whole thing is just one level, kinda, but it's a delightfully festive level with presents and Christmas bells and Tory looking absolutely adorable. And the thing is, that single level is fun. Like, really fun. And a lot of that comes down to the new mechanics introduced. It seems like this is a sneak peek into the gameplay that we can expect in the upcoming Tory Saturn, and I have to say that it has me hyped. There are two main moves, a downward slam which gives you a burst of speed, and a homing attack that you can use on certain objects. It basically takes all the good stuff from modern Sonic. It feels so good to play and just try to optimize movement as much as possible. The thing is, to see everything in the game you have to replay this level a fair few times. This wasn't necessarily an issue for me, as I really enjoyed trying to get quicker and quicker times, or trying to ring all the bells, but I can see how it would be a negative to most people. That's where the bonus presents come in. I don't want to spoil most of these, so again, this is your spoiler warning. These bonus presents can take a few forms. Some of them are nothing more than skins applied to Tory, such as a Beanie skin, or one that has Tory, Macbat and Tasty all together. There are even characters from other games completely. Regina and Mac, characters from a game series that frequently gets referenced in Siactro's work, are playable, as well as Chubby the Snowman, a character from Mission in Snowdrift Land. One of these levels even has you play as 4 Tories at once, and it was quite fun trying to figure out how to best approach that without letting any of them fall off. The character skins are only one part of this though. A couple of the bonuses actually give you whole new levels to play. One of these is called Tory Into Dreams, obviously inspired by Nights Into Dreams, and another is a demo for the as yet Patreon exclusive Siactro game Pengu Blast. Heck, there's even a top-down adventure game type level where you have to help Tory to buy some ice cream. These little extras make the game feel exciting, while also making me super excited for Tory Saturn. A real treat for the holiday season. Number 3, Tory 2. Tory 2 feels in a way like it does everything that Tory 3D does, but better. The original game clearly had Sonic inspirations, but the main times you'd be going fast were when you were on boost strips. Tory 2 expands on the idea of speed by introducing gates and rings that give you a massive speed beast. As a result, the gameplay feels significantly expanded upon, and it's even more satisfying. I also like the theming of the levels, especially the final level, which is a marked improvement on the original game for me. And the soundtrack is excellent here. But one of my favourite elements is the bonus levels. These are Christmas themed, and as a result, playing them has become my Christmas Eve tradition. Each one has a different aim, and they're full of Christmas charm, as well as a few cool cameos. I love this game, I really do. With all this, you may wonder how the heck Tory 3D is ranked above it. Well, let's find out. Number 2, Tory 3D. Tory 3D was the first Siactro game that I played. It was my entrance into the Siactro universe, and I have to say, it was a heck of a break into it. The gameplay, as unrefined as it is in this early point in the series, is just plain fun, and the levels all feel unique. Plus the vibes are excellent. The pink cityscape, the cozy winter vibe, the neon highway. The sequels have some great themes, but they don't feel quite as quaint as the ones here. But in order to go into the real reason this game has impacted me so much, I need to delve into spoilers, and I have to stress right now, if any of these games should be experienced spoiler free, it's this game right here. If you haven't yet, go play Tory 3D. It is so worth it and it won't take you long. Siactro's games often have some sort of horror theme to them, and Tory 3D is no different, although its effectiveness varies. In one level, you'll be speeding down a hill and then suddenly a giant jaw fades into view, forcing you to have to stop. It can be a bit of a jump scare if you aren't expecting it. The same goes for the snowballs, which are actually monsters which open their tooth-filled jaws as you get close, although the roar they do is a bit goofy. There are also tears in reality which have code within them, and they start making a crackly interference sound as you get close. This stuff is all intriguing, but none of it compares to the level Starry Sky. At first, this level just looks like the first level, Glamour City, with a new layout, but then something weird happens. Suddenly, everything is bathed in red, the music becomes more muted, and that crackling interference sound can be heard. And ahead of you, you can see one of the stars that are scattered across the background of the level, except it's turned red and its face is a glitchy mess of pixels, and it's heading straight for you. This moment here is what took Tory 3D from, hey, this is a cool game, I'm glad I played it, to, that was one of the most intense experiences I've had in a game, and now I'm obsessed. It's a surprisingly terrifying moment, and even though I've played this level countless times now, the moment that star turns red still makes my skin crawl. When I'm playing games, one of the things that gives a game an edge in my mind is when there are moments that hit me like a ton of bricks. Moments that impact me in some way. The first time Fury Bowser emerges in Bowser's Fury, Madeline calling Madeline stupid in Celeste, the first time you hear the piano tinkling to indicate the appearance of a guardian in Breath of the Wild. These moments are moments that stick with me. I always find myself thinking about them and the impact they had on me. The stars in Tory 3D are one of these moments, and none of Siactro's other games have had a moment that quite hits the same, although some have certainly tried. And that moment, in combination with the fact that the game is just plain old fun, makes this my second favourite Siactro game. And for a long time, it was my favourite. Number 1, Super Kiwi 64. Full disclosure, when I started this list, I did not have Super Kiwi 64 as number 1. Tory 3D was my first, and I guess it was hard to topple it as my favourite. And heck, when I played Super Kiwi 64 for the first time, I didn't think much of it. I thought it was a solid 3D platformer, but nothing special. It didn't even get into my top 100 list at that point. But as time went on, so much about it clicked for me. It's so much more than just a reimagining of the original Kiwi 64. It's still a collectathon, and you can still see the Banjo-Kazooie inspirations, but this game, more than I think any other Siactro platformer, feels like its own thing. While horror is an aspect of Siactro's other games, here it feels like that darkness, that eeriness is centre stage. The environments are weird, almost apocalyptic. A jungle with a crashed, abandoned aircraft, weird skeletal figures who seem to march back and forth unendingly, a desert set to a dark, burnt orange sky. It's weird, it's uncomfortable, it's fascinating. It feels like there's a history to this place. It feels like the island that acts as the setting has some dark secrets that always intrigue me. Most other Siactro games feel like they're trying to blindside you with the creepy moments in an otherwise bright and colourful world. Super Kiwi 64 has cartoony characters, but it takes place in a world of darkness, evil, isolation. The atmosphere is unrivaled. Oh, and I can't forget to mention the soundtrack. It feeds into the impeccable atmosphere perfectly. It helps that the actual gameplay here is fantastic. You have a few moves at your disposal, such as being able to run, glide, and perform a corkscrew attack, which can let you cling to walls. This moveset makes traversing the stages incredibly fun, especially given how finely tuned the controls feel. It's an absolute joy. And then during the making of this video, Super Kiwi 64 actually got an update known as Doomsday, and it's almost everything I adored about the base game. It doesn't have the same atmosphere, but each of the levels has its own atmosphere, which all works so incredibly well. The gameplay is as solid as ever, and there are some excellent cameos and references that made me really happy. The soundtrack is also still awesome. The DLC is just more of what I adored about the base game, and while I still probably prefer the base game over Doomsday, I think what we have here is just another layer of excellence on what was already a phenomenal game. Super Kiwi 64 feels like something special that comes from a developer who already makes amazing games. It took me a while to see it, but this game is the game that I think about all the time, the one I love replaying in its entirety the most. Every moment is excellent. If it's not clear already, I have a great love for this developer and these games. Since making this video, I've reevaluated Siactro's games in my top 100, and now everything from Beanie upwards has a place there. These games are loving homages to genres and styles of game I have a lot of love for, but they go far beyond that and end up having more value than simple imitation or parody. I look forward to every release now, and I can't wait to see what Siactro will grace us with in the future. That's that.